Lamaji, we are live now on the Facebook. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you very well. And
Okay.
what we will do now, I will just introduce you in a few lines, and then you can take it up from there. Okay?
Does the image look dark to you on your end?
Yeah.
Because
It's looking darker.
okay, let's here. No. Under this here. Can you see here?
Hello all. Gary ji, how are you? Hi. A little darker now, the image.
Okay, we're going to add some more light here.
Yes. The previous one was better, Lamaji.
Oh, let there be
Hello.
light.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Akila. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Akila,
Okay,
very nice
good.
to see you.
All right, good. Okay. All right, I'm going to turn off my phone, my microphone, okay?
Right. So it works like this, that we are live on the Facebook now, and I will introduce Lamaji, and then he will go on for a while, and then we will see whether there are questions or we can discuss among ourselves. Is that okay?
Yes, fine.
Okay, Lamaji. So I am very pleased to welcome you all, and Lamaji and our very old veteran Ambedkarite, Gary ji, and all of our friends here. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to have an interaction with Lama Rangdrol, who is one of the pioneers of the friendship between the followers of Baba Saheb Ambedkar in India and the African American brothers and sisters in the United States. Lama Rangdrol has a very interesting life. He spent his life in the intellectual pursuit of the truth, trying to understand the communities all over the world. But his interest is very deep into the Ambedkarite communities, and he has been studying the Ambedkarite communities, particularly Baba Saheb Ambedkar, for a long time. And besides being a prolific writer, he is also a practicing psychologist, and he has been a community leader working in places right from Oakland to places like Hawaii and Harlem. So he is a kind of a guy who has devoted his entire life for the development of the communities. He has been to India. He has gone to all over the places, and he has met the community, spent time with the community, lived in the houses of the Ambedkarite communities, and he has sort of, we won't say adopted, but he is the part of the big Ambedkarite family. And his life quest has been to find the ways to bring these communities together. And even before coming to India, Lamaji has been trying to reach out to the Ambedkarite communities, and then finally, when he could, before a decade, find an opportunity to come to India, he could finally come and spend a lot of time. And after that, he has been coming to India on several occasions. So we are going to hear from Lamaji. He is a very dear and very close friend about, of course, Buddhism, but in relationship with a very wider movement of civil rights in the United States and in India, and how important it is for us to bring these communities together in the context of the world that the Buddha has has striven harder for. So without standing between him and you, I would request my dear friend, my brother, and very senior Ambedkarite and African American leader to talk to you. So I'm handing it over to my dear friend Lama Rangdrol ji.
Jai Bhim, everyone. For those of you who don't know, this wonderful moderator is my good friend Mangesh from India, who is responsible for my ability to have visited India and to make the first step, the first leap in establishing this bridge. And he is the embodiment of the Ambedkarite movement that is transnational, global, adept, and sensitive to the human need for uplift from suffering throughout the world. And it's a great privilege to be in your presence again, Mangesh, and I thank you so much for your devoted work, which is at this point so vast that it is almost unspeakable. And I know what it is to sacrifice in order to be available for the people. So thank you so much for that. The first thing I wanted to do was to express my condolences to those who may be listening and those who are not able to attend, but they are either sick, they have sick family members, or they unfortunately have had fatalities as a result of this spread of this disease. I was sharing with Mangesh that I'm hearing from students and friends from all over the world. This global pandemic has affected people on every continent in every way imaginable. And so before we get started, I just wanted to again express my condolences for those who have lost loved ones, those who will lose loved ones, and those who may not be with us next year. Regarding this COVID situation, which is on everybody's mind, and I wanted to spend a little time there, and I will get into my thoughts on making this bridge between communities. I will be available to discuss all questions regarding any aspect of Buddhism that I may have knowledge about. That's all coming. But first, let me say that for myself, after spending some years in undergraduate and graduate school and working actually 20 years, I decided to go into Buddhist retreat because I wanted to save myself from the plantation of the mind that my country had bestowed upon me from birth as a birth obligation. And when I went to retreat, I stayed there for several years in a cabin the size of most people's bathroom, along with my then girlfriend, now wife of 25 years. And without running water, with very little heat. And at the time, people asked me, what, have you lost your mind? We're in the America, the land of plenty. Our job is to make as much money as possible, to get the biggest house possible, to get all the nice goodies, and so on and so forth. And I said, no, I've been down that road, and there's something greater even than that, and it can be found in the confines of isolation physically and the deep meditation experience of being isolated in one's own mind. Now, 20 years later, I find that that choice has come full circle, and I am able to really understand how those who have lost the ability to move about as they would like, those who are confined to their homes, those who are now unable to escape the vicissitudes of their own thoughts, the suffering that may be apparent as a result of that. The question is, for us as Buddhists, what is our reality? Our reality is, unfortunately, many of us have had to be forced into this situation rather than voluntarily realizing that Buddhism itself is this experience, and that all things are impermanent, and that the fragile nature of day-to-day living as it once was just a few months ago was just an illusion. And so I feel at one with you because I've been through this transition of not only becoming confined to quarters, but for me, even to experience homelessness and so on and so forth. And I know that it is difficult, but Buddhism is a tool for surviving this aspect. What is the plan? What plan can you have for surviving this outside of the mental torment that one may feel as a result of isolation, where all the problems that one could reduce as a result of distraction have now come full circle and full bearing on your private mind in the face of this disease? My response is, each one of us must try to understand in our own way, in our own space, what strategic prevention means. Strategic prevention is avoiding contact in a way that could expose us to the virus itself. The second strategy is home remedy. Why is home remedy so important? And each of us has our own way in our own home of thinking about what would happen to me if I got sick? How would I deal with it? The reason strategic prevention and home remedy are so important is because they are the front lines of this response to this disease. And for many of us, it is the only line, because going to the hospital, at least in America, for those who may even have insurance and have that privilege, there's no guarantee that one will come home. And so our ability to prevent exposure and our ability to take care of ourselves in our homes is the front lines for us. This is particularly true for the African American community that some of you well know is being unfortunately focused upon as one of the primary groups of people for infection and fatality. So there is this need for us to really understand what our role is. And that role of surviving is inseparable from one's Buddhist life. Because without us, Buddhism, the light of Buddhism dims. And so each and every one of us is necessary for the future. So before I go into the esoteric, aspects of Buddhism, which everybody always wants to know about, I think that fundamentally, if there's a Buddhist practice for today, it is focusing your life, leaning towards survival in every way. And for those of you who have children and family members and loved ones, that type of focus has to be extended to your immediate surroundings. That is our responsibility. Personally, I want to share with you that early February, when the news, and I'm speaking to you from Seattle, which was initially the epicenter of COVID infection in America. The people that were dying, as initially announced, are only miles from me. And at the time that the news of the pandemic coming to American shores happened, my wife fell ill. Our home became the epicenter. She had fever, she had cough, she had malaise, tiredness, and so on. And we were unable to get her tested early. In 1 week, she dropped 6 pounds. The symptoms came and went for several weeks. And at one point, they were so strong, I had to take her to the COVID emergency room, the place of, for some people, no return. And I had to drop her off there because they wouldn't let me in. We're certain from the symptoms that she had some form of the virus, but again, we weren't able to be tested. And so when I tell you that your home is ground zero, I'm speaking personally. Fortunately, as a part of my training, I was a nurse, a psychiatric nurse for 20 years. And so I have a nursing background, and I am at peace and have calm with regards to serious illness being in my close proximity. What I will say from that point to present is she has fully recovered. And the journey was arduous. And so when I say that I feel at one with people who are concerned about themselves and their loved ones in this moment, I mean that I have had a visit from the virus, I believe, in my own home. And I had to fight the battle with it inside my wife. And Buddhism and faith and patience and love and altruism and compassion and all the great qualities that we know are part of our being were brought to bear in a way that contributed to her being alive in this moment. And so in a greater way, I wanted to, sometimes people say, Lama Rangdrol, why are you talking about African Americans? Are you a racist? Are you caught up in race? What about impermanence? What about all sentient beings? And so on and so forth. And I asked my teacher about this once, some years ago, and he said something very simple, which I'll share with you. And that is that African Americans are human beings, and human beings are African Americans. Everyone listening to me is human. There's no greater intersection than this, no mutuality greater than this, no solidarity greater than this. Therefore, our relationship is indisputably human. What this conversation about today is our role in uplifting our mutual human condition. I would also like to say that the English language is inherently gender biased. It's important to also say that no matter how oppressed a group or class may be, it is often worse for women. They ought not need to tell us that this in order for us to see their suffering right before our eyes. Our heritage as Buddhists is to propel goodness into the future, just like Buddha did. As we are the recipients of his intention, so too are we the vehicle of better tomorrows. Sometimes in the quest for understanding, we get caught up in the details of the philosophy and approach and differing faceted aspects of Buddhism, and we forget that we are united in our role to propel goodness through us into the future. Most important is to lean all individual, family, community, and organizations toward survival of illness, starvation, and homelessness right now. And let us remember that Buddhism, unlike us, has seen it all, including attempts at eradication, conquest, and appropriation of its noble qualities. As a community, we have survived it all for over 2,000 years. The same can be said true of Baba Sahib and his legacy within his lifetime. When we lean towards Buddhism and we lean towards Baba Sahib, we are on solid ground. We don't need to look any further for a plan of action that's sustainable, survivable, and contributive to the future. We, through these respective communities, have survived as the noble community, icons and practice fundamental to the perpetuation of human dignity and uplift. Some people will say, oh, Lamaji, all you do is talk. I hear this. Where is your politic, your riches to bear on the poor and suffering? My response is, in witnessing the coming and going of John Kennedy, because I was young, but I was aware of his election and his ultimate end. I was there, here in America, watching on television live, not a video, not a film, not some footage in some other medium. I was alive when the bus boycott was on television. I saw Dr. King come. I heard everything he said, and I saw him go too. The same is true for Malcolm. I saw Malcolm when he rose, and I saw on the day that he left. I also saw the Panthers. I heard all of their rhetoric. I saw them come, and I saw them go. Their rhetoric and the billions of dollars spent for advancement of their cause is something that we need to really try to put in proper perspective. And I have one question. After it's all said and done, why are Dr. King's people in America and India dying in disproportionately high numbers due to the same disparities he gave his life to bring to an end? Why is that? How is it that with all of this politic and all the money spent, are we in some ways still seeing the same people struggling socially and politically that we did from the beginning? This question gives us a relative kind of point of view. There must be something else besides money and politics that is important to the advancement of human suffering. I maintain that our philosophy and our practice is that thing. So what could be the strategy for solidarity? I've personally endured quite a bit here in America. I've been insulted. I've been faced with strong opposition, marginalization, undermining, personal and professional attack against me and my family, and often have been reduced to 5-minute or less talks when I appear, if I'm allowed to speak at all. In the early days, around 2000, I just put 2 words on the title of a book, Black Buddha. And those 2 words caused me to be kicked out of most American Buddhist centers. I mean, I was literally taken off the rolls as a teacher. And then the invitations that I had, I would say the word is disinvited. I was invited by the students, and then I was disinvited by the people who were running operations, because those 2 words at that time were considered to be so radical, so affrontive to mainstream Buddhism in America and what it was trying to achieve, that I was thrown out. And there's still some places where I'm not allowed to teach. My point is the power of the word. What is our strategy for the future? I've been telling my students here in America, the strategy is concision. Understand the power of the word. Sometimes one word can mean everything. It can be the call to millions of people becoming activated. And we know this from some simple words such as educate, agitate, and organize. 3 simple words. I was asked to teach Buddhism here in Seattle at the local university. Some scholars invited me, and it was very interesting. I was asked to sit on a panel, but when I got to the panel, they said, okay, Lama Ji, go ahead. They refused to say anything. They wanted to hear what I had to say. And so I taught the community, the standing room only. And in among that talk, which was September, the election for the American president was coming up in November. And I knew that everybody wanted to know what I thought in terms of the outcome of the election. And here, Seattle's a very liberal community, and so most people felt that Hillary Clinton would be the next president and first female president of America. During my talk, I gave them 4 words, and I said, after that, I'm not going to talk about this anymore. And those 4 words were, "Hail Trump, Rome fell." And people looked at me like they did not know what I was talking about. How could I possibly be talking about Hail Trump when everybody knew that the outcome would be to the contrary? And now, some years later, I don't get that question anymore. And anybody who doesn't understand Rome fell need only get in their car and drive around their neighborhood and down and through their community. They'll see what I'm talking about. And so these 4 words, even though they could not be heard at that time, they have become rather clear with regards to the ability for Buddhism to be objective in the face of sentimentality, tell the truth, and then be loving and kind and concerned as people slowly come to the truth, which may be different than what they think it should be. And so this idea of concision is extremely important, the use of the word. There's almost no substitute for the power of using the totality of your mind to work through all the issues so that you alone can come to that one word that makes a difference and then speak it with the authority of truth. Because as my friend Mangesh said or wrote recently, in order to be a truthful person, you must first know the truth. And sometimes the truth is not what people choose to believe, but still it is our responsibility as honest and truthful people, Buddhists, to hold ground with the truth. And so I offer this understanding for those who don't know what it's like to be a Buddhist teacher, an African American Buddhist teacher in the land controlled and dominated by the descendants of my enslavers and their people of color allies. It's not easy. But there is relief for me in the global community. And I'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment and why our bridge, our connection is so important. Let me just say that we must recognize that we are in a battle for time and space and the future. Buddha lived, and as a result of his ideas and his intention, in this time and this place, in your home, where you are right now, he exists. because he won the battle for time and space and the future. And as the community that believes in him and represents him, it is our responsibility, likewise, to use our intellect and our wherewithal to understand what this battle is. COVID-19 will not destroy Buddhism, but our inattention to the battle of time, space, and the future can be very destructive, because if we don't attend to it, we risk being irrelevant in the future. And so that is our call. That is, the same can be said about Baba Sahib. He's gone, and yet here we are because of him, because he too breached time and space and the future and gave a gift that could not be taken. If there's a question about the bridge, and I have, as Mangesh said, I think it might be true that I pioneered the discussion at the cost of my Buddhist career here in America, because in order to speak the truth, I had to go up against extremely powerful forces here. And they did and have done as much as they can to impede my ability to build this bridge, because the bridge between us is formidable. The power and the majesty of all that we have learned as a result of generations and decades and centuries and millennia of suffering could come to bear. So that being said, now as I look back over 20 years, I share with you a couple of observations. One is, generally speaking, African Americans live in fear of changing their mind. They're not fearful as a people, but you must understand that the conditions that they live under disallow them to assert themselves outside of the comfort zone that is designed for them in this society without having negative feedback. And it is frightening. It's not frightening in terms of fear that something's going to happen. The fact is that you can lose your job. Your lifetime income can be negatively affected by your statements as a Buddhist teacher. Your access, your reputation, these things are at grave risk when you speak forthrightly about wanting to rescue yourself from the plantation of the mind. This is really difficult to understand because we have so much here. You would think that freedom comes from the wealth, and it's true. African Americans are the wealthiest and most powerful people who are African outside of the continent in history. And yet, when it comes to liberating our mind from the obligatory nature of conformity in the society that controls us, we become fearful. And I mean scholars, I mean activists, I mean intellectuals. There is this fear in our community because there is no model here that it is survivable to exit the oppression that was handed down to us from birth, that we have no model in Buddhism. And so, can you still see?
Lamaji, yes. It's going on very well, Lamaji. Lamaji, there is some problem at your end. Can you unmute your mic, please?
How's that?
That's nice. That's okay.
Okay. So people are um, taken aback by Baba Sahib's ability to have, after all of the politic and all of the publication and all of the efforts that he made to come up with an idea that could help oppressed people change their minds based on their identity. This is not known in America. It's not fully understood. Even Dr. King, with all of his deserved accolade, could not bring himself to leave the religion responsible for justification in the enslavement of his family. And so this bridge is critical. This relationship is critical to the identity of the oppressed people in African America with the Dalit community, and particularly the Ambedkarite community, role modeling for us what it means to be liberated in the mind from the expectations of self-diminution by a controlling class. So that understood, I have a simple request. And that request is for the Ambedkarite community in India, and as well as Buddhists throughout the world, to help African America find a seat at the table of global Buddhism that we can call our own. Not one that is given to us or bestowed upon us by people who have been in control of this wonderful society, but on our own. I request this on behalf of my people, as Ambedkar requested the same at the round table on behalf of his. And you intellectuals, you know what happened in the confrontation between him and Gandhi at the round table. You know. He made the case, Mr. Gandhi, we do not need you to represent us. We can represent ourselves. We have a representative, and he is me. And African Americans who are practicing Buddhism, we are capable of representing ourselves at the global level, but we need help. We need help in creating a model that people can see and believe in, because it doesn't exist here, and it may not ever exist here because of the fear of going up against the agency of oppression in this country. This means I want to put an end to non-African Americans and their people of color allies defining, coercing, pulling strings of fame and wealth, creating doppelgangers, and otherwise undermining the legitimacy of the Black Buddhist voice I have braved to bring into global human consciousness. Our primary mission is in service to Buddha, not the comforts and accolade of our enslavers' descendants. We need proof that an African American can ascend to the highest levels of Buddhist realization and escape the American plantation of the mind at the same time. This is the tipping point from which the zeitgeist of Buddhist consciousness can awaken in our people, and so bring a new and refreshed model of African American contribution to the world, as Dr. King did. The ultimate goal of such a seat, which would be peopled not by an individual, but rotated among our wonderful intellectual Buddhist teachers here, and what their men and women teachers and what their combined contribution, I believe, can be, should we be able to finally connect this bridge, is an age of enlightenment African Americans can call their own. That is an age of enlightenment despite all of the ideas that exist in our society to the contrary. I believe this to be the final stage of building the human bridge of uplift, inseparable from the depths of both Baba Sahib's profound inclusion of our mutuality and the lofty heights of his erudite philosophical conquest, as well as the evolutionary maturation of Dr. King's astute observation that the destiny of India is tied to the destiny of America and the uplift of human dignity.
Lamaji, as always, in a very short and in a very structured manner, you have elaborated your very dense thoughts very clearly to the audiences. Let me ask you a question about the contemporary times. Now that we know that the societies are changing in India, in the United States, what is your message to the youths of the African American communities and the Ambedkarite communities? What kind of a message you would like to give to the young people? What can be their approaches to build to strengthen these ties that exist between the communities, and how they should go forward hand in hand?
Slavery, Baba Sahib's talked a lot about the American Negro experience. He said that we should observe it because it's very telling on the human condition and what movements look like and their challenges. And so, from the point of view of the history of African Americans and slavery, you must remember that when African Americans were brought to America, they had no way of going home. It's not possible. No matter how far you walk on the North American continent, you never reach Africa. That's one point. There is no going home for us. The other point is to really understand African America's plight from the point of view that the Africans, our families, our people never came for us. We have been here isolated for centuries. They never came. And even unto this day, there's conflict between the African American community and Africans in America. They see us sometimes as less than because we are a conquered people. We are separate from our culture for many generations. We don't know our language. We don't know our family name. We don't know where we lived. We know nothing. And so from this, we can draw some conclusions that lead young people to kind of understand the importance of this bridge, you see. African Americans, and I would say Ambedkarite young people in America, both, we need to go to India and check on our people. Dr. King's people, we need to check on them. We need to go physically and be present. This is a tremendous contribution, and it is at great expense and perhaps at great risk, but it can define a generation that we, unlike what has happened in America, refuse, regardless of the obstacles put before us, to allow our people to not be checked on by one another. I would say this too, that to the extent that the Ambedkarite community in India whenever possible, should come and see and visit African America. Get past the books, get past the propaganda, get past the privileged wall that separates us. Come through it. It's not made of stone. You can come through it. And so the next level beyond the bridge is to make face-to-face, human-to-human contact, because there's so much about us that we can learn simply by looking into one another's eyes, simply by being present and saying, yes, I understand. So if there were a goal in my mind in the future that could operate from the basis of establishing this bridge in our generation, for the next generation, of course, bridge being built, go across. Because it's from that cross-pollination of human contact that the best parts about us will be known. They will reveal themselves. I know this personally. I know how my life changed by traveling to India. I know because not only have I been to India, but I teach at the retreats for Ambedkarites here in America, and I know what my presence in those community means. What does it mean? It means that the people who somehow worked their way through slavery, defeated segregation, educated themselves, fought the Nazis, and other kinds of unbelievable tasks. We are real. We're real people. And we have a level of dignity associated with that effort that is not easily communicated in paper or virtually. We are the real deal. We know what it's like to throw oppression off of our shoulders to the greatest extent possible. We know the price. We know the suffering. I'm a descendant of slave uh, uh, plantation life, and the crop at the plantation in Maryland, close to where I taught an Ambedkarite retreat, the crop grown was not tobacco, it was not cotton. You know what it was? Human beings. They raised human beings to sell to the South for hard labor. That's where my family entered this American experience. We understand what it's like. Full-blown slavery, where every crime imaginable was committed against us. That's who we are. We're not basketball players and singers and dancers and movie stars. We are not that. We are the living example of the fortitude that it takes for people to address their oppression and make substantive change that can be of benefit to generations to come and be a role model to the world. That's who Dr. King is. That's who Malcolm is. That's who the Panthers were. They are us. And so when we land on Indian soil, not to be tourists, not to live and be pampered in the tourist bubble that we demand of the world, but actually to go out in among the people and be with them and sit with them. And simply, most African Americans don't know that our very presence itself is uplifting. We have no concept. I have to teach people that just being there in the flesh itself is a tremendous contribution. One that we never received because, as I said, our African families and our people never came for us. And so we know what that is. And so that would be my answer to your question for the young people. If we can somehow affect this bridge meaningfully, then the next step in the next generation would be to cross it and to make crossing it as common as getting on an airplane and going anywhere else in the world. But this is not a This is not a geographical bridge. It's a mental bridge, a healing bridge, a bridge of human dignity.
Lamaji, there is a question from the audiences. One of the question is for you, Lamaji, from the audience, is how do we conceive Black Buddhism? This is one question. How do we conceive the idea of the Black Buddhism? And also, what is your conception of Buddhism itself?
First question, how is it best to conceive Black Buddhism? Black Buddhism is an aspiration to be free of all that has occurred to us that's not Buddhism. It puts in proper perspective and as a primary focus the responsibility and accountability that African Americans have, or Black people have, to the participation of perpetuation of their own suffering in their own mind. Black Buddhism is the philosophy and the means to cease participation in the perpetuation of our own suffering, to end it. That's what Black Buddhism is. It is that aspiration and nothing else. And hence it is therefore liberative, and Baba Sahib's teachings are the political theory from which we can make that an actuality. So that we don't have the politic in America. We've never had a leader like Baba Sahib here. Never. Now, have we had revolts? Yes. Nat Turner, Denmark, VC, and so on and so forth. We've had many of them. Have we had social justice movements? Yes, we have, but we have been unable to liberate ourselves from the identity that arises from nowhere else but slavery. So Black Buddhism is the aspiration to free oneself from that. What was the second question?
What is your general conception of Buddhism itself?
If conventional reality, the ordinariness of life is the earth, Buddhism to me is the sky. Unimpeded, freedom, a place where free people dwell. Home, the future, the past, the present, an identity that's survivable in terms of ever increasing one's sense of personal and human dignity. And the means to do it.
So Lamaji, there is one question that long time back when we had the interaction, you talked about African American community being a drum beating community, that if you do something in Auckland, it goes all the way up to the Harlem, and it's like a wildfire.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
you are being an integral part of this beautiful community of our people there. How do you see the level of awareness among the African Americans in terms of what is happening in India, particularly among the Ambedkarites? And do you see any change in that awareness among the African American communities in general?
I have seen a change. I'd say within the last 3 to 5 years, and this is because I would say mostly the efforts of the Ambedkarite activists here who have been successful in penetrating the political offices and the media. I'm seeing far more stories about the downside of caste here, which I did not see, obviously, 20 years ago, nor could I say I saw with any regularity a decade ago. But in the last 3 to 5 years, there have been some very powerful movements forward that have brought the conditions of untouchability to the forefront of the American mind in general. I have always experienced, like myself, a deep interest in what's going on in India among African Americans. We want to. I always get that question. Once I say that, yes, I've been to India and I've tried to work as best I could with the Ambedkarite community. There is instant interest. There always has been, but the information has been very hard to get to because there is. I'm telling you, there is a wall, a propaganda wall. And even today, when we get the truth, we get some other kind of version of the truth as well, both. And so there's some confusion. And I have, on fairly regularly on this end, encountered people who don't know. When I bring this up, they say, "Oh, they're still doing that over in India." They have no idea. They think that untouchability ended, in the 1950s or earlier. They believe this. And so, there's always a need to educate people about this. But generally speaking, I think that it's become more easy to discuss these things because I can say, did you see the recent article about it? Go on YouTube and look at this video. Here, let me give you a website that you can find more information. Here are some documents, some books that were generated. I'm talking about some of the work that's been done by Equity Labs with regards to oppression on the internet and so on and so forth. There's been there are more tools to communicate more quickly here. But generally speaking, I think that African Americans outside the Buddhist community are still led to believe that untouchability is an Indian problem and has nothing to do with us. And that's the work. I'm finding more African American Buddhist teachers are becoming unable to ignore the reality that to be Buddhist is to be engaged with what's going on in India today. So I think there's been a lot of growth, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
And Lamaji, there is one question coming from the audience. The question is, it's a generic question about how we can revive Buddhism in India and also in the United States. So that's a question from an audience.
From my point of view, I've taught Buddhism in most major cities in America, amongst many people. There are aspects of where we need to go strategically and geopolitically that require us to focus more deeply on mutuality and solidarity. There are certain things, as I tried to outline earlier, that the Ambedkarite community of India has to contribute to African American consciousness, to define what freedom is. It's one thing for me to speak about Ambedkar. It's another thing for an Ambedkarite born and raised in India to speak about the struggle. And there are certain things that America can do because of our wealth and because of our power that cannot be done in India. We are not a society beholden to caste. And so we have certain latitude to contribute in ways that are unique. So the issue then is understanding and defining strategically what it is that we have in both communities, on both continents, that can contribute to the other, and creating vehicles and opportunities for us to have that kind of exchange. For example, African Americans at any given moment can hire a jet and come to Maharashtra at any given moment. We have that much power. We don't need a commercial airline. Celebrities do it all the time. We have this kind of power to be present. And but the plan has to be clearly articulated so people, because unfortunately, Americans in general and African Americans in particular, we have this kind of sense of what do I get out of it? What can that do for me? Which is not really a humanistic question. But if we answer that question, they can be moved to act. And they're not talking about money or, material resources or anything. Sometimes if you can just say, listen, these people need us, and that's what you get out of it. You get to go and be there where people need you. And let me say, there once was a group of people in Africa that had a problem in South Africa. It was called apartheid. And they were the majority was being dominated by the minority. And they reached out to the world. And let me tell you, Ronald Reagan was the president and Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister of England, and both felt that apartheid was a necessary evil for the global economy. It was the people who differed. It was the people, the students, the young people who called for divestiture and sanctions in a way that did not allow for the leaders of the nation to simply think that apartheid was livable. It was the people responsible for getting Mandela out of prison. I say that because at the time I was working for then City Councilwoman of Los Angeles, Maxine Waters, now Congresswoman for many years. And when Mandela was released, I was involved in the celebration when he visited Los Angeles. And the people who had put in the time and energy, the people came to see him. And so I'm a witness to that. And so the African Americans have power if they can understand where that power can be used effectively. This is true. We went to war against Hitler during Jim Crow.
Wow.
Came home to Jim Crow. Okay.
Yes.
There was no plan. There was no plan in the Revolutionary War to end slavery. There was a plan to end slavery during our Civil War, but it turned into Jim Crow, and there was no plan when our parents went into both the Asian theater and the European theater and lost their lives with no promise whatsoever of liberation from segregation. That would not come for years, and yet they went because they felt that it was part of their responsibility as Americans. And so we have this very powerful aspect of our society, which is for the taking if it can be tapped. If the instrument can be strummed correctly, it will come. But the bridge needs to be there. That's why I've dedicated my life to trying to support bridge building. It needs to be there.
Good. We have about 14 people joining in Zoom. And is there any question from any of you who are joining on the Zoom? Because we are live streaming it on Facebook, and there are people who are listening on the Facebook, and they are writing on the questions there. Any of you would like to say something or ask Lamaji anything?
Yes. My name is Akila. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I was wondering, how can African American Buddhists channel their frustration and their anger in a positive way? I understand that the concept of impermanence, but as an African American, sometimes I feel as though we take 2 steps forward and 3 steps back. So as an African American Buddhist, how do I channel my anger and my frustration in a positive way?
Good question, Akilaji. Lamaji?
I think we, just in terms of approach, we have to kind of divide this up into two segments. One, African American, and two, Buddhist, because sometimes we get them confused. As an African American, you know that anger, upset, unresolved trauma, and so on and so forth leads to breakdown of the body. It leads to high blood pressure. It leads to diabetes. It leads to obesity. It leads to a state of confusion and self-deprecation. It leads to a sense of perpetuated frustration. None of these things are foundations to build a healthy and purposeful approach. So as an African American, not just as individuals, we have to look at the history of these feelings and what it has done in terms of as an impediment, and evaluate carefully if we want that to be a part of the configuration of how we are going to liberate ourselves. Now, as Buddhists, you could take the point of view from the Four Noble Truths and the issue of interdependent origination, that all such suffering in our minds requires us to participate in it. And that for us as Buddhists, liberation begins with understanding how we are participating in our own frustrations. I mean, if there's somebody in your house demanding that you be frustrated at every moment, then that's one problem. But if you find that frustration to be ever present in your mind, then who exactly is that that's doing that, that's causing you to feel that? And interdependent origination is an approach that says, like links in a chain, they need to be together in order to cause things to happen. And simply removing one link or two links from the chain breaks its ability to have its power. And so strategically, as an African American, we have to look at the history of these frustrations, which are very deep, very real. And I might say, add on to that misogyny and patriarchy, you've got quite a lethal mix in terms of you being able to sustain a healthy identity that can lead you to higher levels of appreciation for your human dignity. And as a Buddhist, even more so, do we have the responsibility. See, Buddhism, to be a Buddhist is not a namesake. It's not a label. It's not something you can say you belong to. It's not a group. It's not an organization. It's not a book. It's not any of that. Buddhism is the requirement on you to address your mind and nothing else. That's what it is. And so, by sometimes, trust me, I get these kinds of questions often. What do we do about what those people did to us? Well, a lot of times those people are no longer around, and we are continuing to make it live in ourselves. And I'm saying that, I know what it's like to be beaten by the police. I know what it's like to see my community. The first time I saw a military tank at my police station in my community. And I thought to myself, wow, look at that. There's a tank here. I was captivated by it. And then I asked myself as a kid, who's that for? And then I realized who it was for. It was for us. SWAT, the idea of SWAT itself was founded based on having a paramilitary response to the expression of upset in our community in Los Angeles. Trust me. I know what it's like. I'm a brother. I saw my mother die of cancer in front of my eyes. I've been spat upon. I've been, treated extremely poorly at times. And my response is realization, freedom. Because it's very difficult to build a substantive foundation to anything as long as you're still harboring these feelings. So, there is the small letting go of what somebody did, and then there's the big letting go of all of it eventually, if you can. Because when you do, people can hear you. Not just African American people, but people all over the world. And you can make a difference. And you can become iconic because of your positioning of your mind. And you can truly represent who you say you believe you are in this world. And so we can talk about that more. I know you don't live far from me, so we can finish this conversation. But that's my response to you at this point, for you to contemplate until I see you.
A beautiful, succinct explanation, Lamaji. There is a little bit of a funny question that you might enjoy to answer it. I will read
Thank
the
you.
question for you. It's from Rishi Chaner. The question is, Jai to you.
Jai
Some of the oldest statues and engravings of Buddha depict him with curly hair, cornrows, and fuller lips. Are you
Yes.
listening?
Yes.
There are people who say that the Buddha was of African descent. Do you have any thoughts about this? Could there be truth in the statement that some part of Black history is actually Buddhist history?
Well, I think I've surfed the experience both of the literal and the philosophical ideas about that. And I mean, we don't have to really wonder about these things. As I'm sure you may know, Mangesh, the Greek philosopher Herodotus, 500 BC, wrote that in his travels he observed that the people of India and the people of Africa were very similar, and that they differed in hair texture. But other than that, they had great similarity. And as a matter of fact, he called India Asiatic Ethiopia. And so why is he having this observation around the time of Buddha? And we have become so divided that we have to have a conversation on whether that is actually true or not. What has happened to us? So I have been in Cambodia. I have been in India. I have, taken pictures and, had these conversations with people everywhere. And so we can, think of Africa as being a racial place, but historically speaking, it is a human place. And one need only get your DNA done and you will find out that Africa somehow creeps in for most people. And so although people would disagree with me, I say that the literature and the science is with me. and so from that point of view, there's that response. However, I don't know of this modern racialization existing in the Nalanda teachings. We are the same race, the same species of mind. And we can look towards ideas about ourselves that are helping us to see our mutuality, or we can entertain ideas that um, fundamentally may be divisive in nature. That's up to us. But I think that the science, the literature, the iconography speaks for itself. And in America, I tell people, did you know? Sometimes, I've taught in the Christian community, in the Muslim community, at the Nation of Islam, with the Panthers, with the Kemetics, who are pharaonic worshippers, the astrologers, the Black astronomers. I've taught in all of those places. And my way of introducing Buddhism is always, did you notice that Buddha has a nose like yours? Did you notice that Buddha has hair like yours? And somehow that, because they want to know their history, and it cuts right through social politics, through religion. It gets right to the heart of the matter. Do you know who you are? Do you know who we are? Do you know? And I tell them, it's not a statue. It's not a monument. There are millions of statues and pictures in caves carved into rivers who look like our community. Did you know? So there is this teaching aspect, which is of great value to us here in America regarding these images. And I have not to this day found a person of African American descent, including women, because there are a lot of women deities who look African too, that I have not found a African American, regardless of their religion or their identity, that has not been interested. And that's the real value. And when it's one thing, I'll just end with this on that issue. It's one thing for me to say that, but to see the statue personally and have a brother or sister Ambedkarite say, see, look at that, in India, is transformative. I'll tell you a secret. My son is sitting here. He's come out, and something happened to him. And with Mangesh's guidance, he was taken to a retreat in India, right? South India? Yeah, South India. And they asked him to speak. And so he, in his infinite wisdom, sat in front of the group. He's covering his ears. He didn't want to hear it. In his infinite wisdom, the first thing he said was, I'm Black, right? And the whole retreat started laughing. They're like, what are you talking about? What? They couldn't, why are you saying you're Black? Because he's light skinned. Like, what are you a color? And for the first time in his mind, he was able to see that is just a label, and there are people in the world who don't have that point of view. It changed him forever. No, he came back a different human being. He came back ready to take his place in our legacy. He came back with purpose and meaning, because the sense of wanting to return the investment, the contribution to his life that journey made, has become inseparable from who he is. Just that one statement. Did you know I'm Black? And people just started laughing at him. Do you know how many African Americans have never had that experience? To be in a place where you have to explain what racism is to people, and how cruelly people treat one another as a result of the color, the melanin, the color of your skin. Do you know how many African Americans who have never had that, been in a place where they could be free like that? These are the great values of this bridge that I'm sharing with you. And to a certain extent, the Ambedkarite community need not do anything but be who you are and speak to us forthrightly about our humanity. That is your contribution.
Lamaji, this is the last question, and
Okay.
we can have another session as well, because we like to hear you. You are very fond of saying Jai Bhim. What does Jai
Jai
Bhim
Bhim.
mean to you?
You know, I've read about 11 volumes, you know, of the 20 some odd volumes. I read about 11. And I have met the community in India and abroad. And on the question of whether what he said and what his people have to offer in this world, are they of any value to me? Like I told you, concision is my name of my game. Jai Bhim says it all. Is a victory. Yes. Now. He is my liberator. So many things in his life and the toil and the troubles that he faced mirror what I have had to go through in America without any explanation and any role model. So Jai Bhim to me means this victory in my mind of him, his philosophy, his life, and the living presence of all that he is in the Ambedkarite community. That's what it means to me.
So Lamaji, thank you so much for joining us. And this Ambedkar Caravan Facebook page is very interesting. We have got lots of followers, like 2.5 lakh people are the followers of this page, and this your talk reaches to a lot of people, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of interest after what you have been talking about in terms of the being the bridge between the African American communities and Ambedkarite communities here in India, and your thoughts about the Buddhism. I would say it's a radical thought, and if we have to say something about it, it's a radical Buddhism. It goes back to the heart of the Buddha itself, and
Yes.
and now that we stand in this very different times and very uncertain times, your talk today has a lot of value and a lot of meaning to both the communities here, and I can reckon in America as well. We will continue to have this conversation with you. We will invite you time and again, and share what we are thinking here and learn from you. And I think that was a wonderful interaction that we have had today. And on this note, I would like to say thank you and Jai Bhim. And we will
Jai Bhim.
Jai Bhim, and we will end the live stream here, and we will talk here for some time. Okay.